Welcome back to the studio audience edition of Hannity, and tonight we are focusing on saving America with a very special guest, Dr. Benjamin Carson. Now, he is the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University. Now, his remarks at last week's National Prayer Breakfast not only set the blogosphere on fire, it also resulted in many asking him to consider a run for elected office. Now, that includes the Wall Street Journal editorial board, which recently published a column that was titled, quote, Ben Carson for President. Now, in just a moment, I'll ask him if he has any plans to pursue a career in politics. But first, pollster Frank Luntz recently convened a focus group of California voters and asked them to watch and dial the doctor's popular speech. Let's take a look at this.
Sean, the words of Benjamin Carson have really struck a chord with a lot of Americans. We're here in Los Angeles with a group of swing voters, and we want to know what they think of his language. But before we go to them, let's go to a clip that dialed particularly well. Remember, the red line represents swing Republicans, the green line swing Democrats. On the deficit and debt, man, does this guy score well.
Our deficit is a big problem. Think about it. And our national debt, $16.5 trillion. You think that's not a lot of money? Tell you what, count one number per second, which you can't even do because once you get to 1,000, it takes you longer than a second. But one number per second, you know how long it would take you to count the 16 trillion? 507,000 years. More than 500,000 years to get there. We have to deal with this.
Clearly that language connected. Now tell me, Dr. Carson, what was so powerful? Give me a word or phrase to describe him.
Passionate.
Articulate.
Sincere.
Bold and real.
Analytical.
Self-reliant.
Truthful. Sincere.
Believable.
Provocative.
Is this the kind of guy that you want to see in politics? Is this the kind of guy, yet why yes?
He's a guy he speaks his mind, and he's very open-minded and
why yes?
passionate.
He speaks for physicians, I think, basically.
I liked his sense of fairness. I felt he was very fair in what he was saying.
What is it about him that cut across partisan lines? You never see that in politics these days.
He seemed to care. He seemed to genuinely care about what he was talking about.
To me, he was just like me. He was just a regular, ordinary person.
Do you think that he was too aggressive? The president was there. Some people thought that it was inappropriate for him to say what he said. You're nodding your head no. You think it was appropriate?
I think it was appropriate because you have to hit on the topics that people want to talk about, and we can't keep candy coating everything. So,
and this is our country.
What does that mean?
It belongs to all of us, not just to the people in Washington. All of us.
Do you think that people in Washington listen to you?
No.
Do you think he listens to you?
Yes. He yes. Being?
Dr. Carson.
Yes.
So there's a language there. Keep going.
And like you said, it's un-American to bite your tongue, to hold back and not say what you think.
You guys agree with that?
Yes.
Yes. It's a good way to get out of the segment. Sean, there aren't many people right now who have the language to connect to the American people, whether it's American values, as you speak of, or common sense, as she spoke of. But there's something about the doctor's message and delivery that really does connect across partisan lines. Very impressive. Back to you.
All right, sounds like Frank may have found some, well, Carson campaign volunteers and still with us to talk about the possibility of a career in politics. The man himself, Dr. Benjamin Carson. Just a quick poll. How many of you would like to see Dr. Carson run? Wow. Okay, that's everybody. What do you make of that?
Well, I've always said that the only way I would go into politics is if God grabbed me by the collar and stuck me there. It's not something that has been an ambition of mine. But I do have a great desire to get our populace educated. Because if we get our populace educated, they will be able to decipher the truth from what's false. And if we don't start doing that, we're going to go down the same path as all the pinnacle nations that preceded us.
You have said, and I've read a lot of speeches now that you have given, and in commencement speeches and elsewhere, and even I think you mentioned in this speech, that doctors played a very pivotal role in terms of our founding and our framers, yes. And you want to see doctors more involved in politics.
I do, because doctors and scientists learn to make decisions based on facts. They use empirical data as opposed to ideologues who don't really have any facts to make their decisions on.
Can I ask, you retire in June.
Yes.
I'm even hesitant to ask you this, but I think I have to because it's on the table. Do you consider, are you aligned with a party? Would you want to answer who you voted for president?
I'm independent.
Okay.
And, you know, I tend to align myself closer with parties that are doing things or advocating things that would be good for the country. And that should tell you who I voted for. I won't go any further than that.
Okay. I'll take a. Anyone want to take any bets? But all right. All right. When we come back, we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to open all this up to our studio audience of political strategists, journalists, medical experts, much more, as they, along with Dr. Carson, they offer up their solutions for helping to save America, whether it's the economy, health care, all issues on the table. Our studio audience, they'll join the discussion next. Welcome back to the special studio audience edition of Hannity, and Dr. Benjamin Carson is with us. All right, you ready to take our audience questions?
Absolutely.
All right, let's start over here. Jason.
I wanted you to ask you about kids growing up in circumstances that you grew up in today, in the ghetto in particular.
Yes.
What's missing? Are there not enough adults with that sort of mindset? Is it a leadership failure? Is it a breakdown of the family? What's the problem?
Combination of the things that you mentioned. There's a great family breakdown. For instance, when you look at the African American community, 70% of the babies are born out of wedlock. Now, you're not supposed to talk about that because all family situations are supposed to be equal these days, right? But they're not equal. That father is very much needed, and producing the right kinds of role models for the children and giving them a value system. Because if you don't provide them with a value system at home, they're going to find it somewhere else, and it may not be a good value system. So you combine that with the fact that when they go to school, in many cases, they're surrounded by a bunch of politically correct people who begin to indoctrinate them in something other than the can-do attitude, and we got a problem.
Dr. Siegel?
You know, Dr. Carson, I'm not surprised that a doctor like you, who's a top pediatric neurosurgeon, who literally has the brains of children in his hands, personal responsibility would be your first and foremost idea. And taking that theme further, I wonder, you started talking about health savings accounts and skin in the game. How do you feel about this idea that if patients knew what they were buying, knew what they were getting, how much a CAT scan cost, how much an MRI cost? Instead, we have a system where all of this feeds together with physicians who are afraid of malpractice, afraid of being sued. So many tests are ordered unnecessarily. Yes. On the patient side, they don't know what they're getting. On the doctor side, they're afraid of not ordering it. What do you have to say about that?
Well, first of all, I would say that you look at all the countries in the world, we're the ones who have the big problem with malpractice. So what is it that's here that isn't everywhere else? The Trial Lawyers Association. Okay, special interest groups. Anything in our society almost that comes out of Washington that doesn't make sense is attached to a special interest group. They've become, as I alluded to in the speech, the fourth branch of government. Until we deal with that, we're going to keep doing things that don't make sense.
Deneen?
Well, Dr. Carson, I want to thank you for your leadership. But you do know that the black liberal establishment is not going to be happy with you. And I'm talking about the community activists, some of the pastors, some of the politicians, and the black media, because it's your story of success that they don't want communicated to the black community because they thrive on talking about blacks are victims and need special treatment. So I want to thank you for all you do and for your leadership, because we need more leaders such as yourself to communicate the story that America really is an exceptional country.
Absolutely, thank you. And I've heard from a lot of black leaders, actually, since this time, who are very thrilled with what I'm saying. I'm sure there are some that are not, but people are starting to think for themselves, and this is what I really enjoy. Black people, white people, brown people, yellow people, think for yourself. Don't be a puppet.
Celia?
So the Government Accountability Office came out with their year-end fiscal report back in January, and they said that we need to start running surpluses of 1% over the next century just to keep the same debt to GDP ratio we have today. Right. The Senate can't even budget or process a budget in the Senate right now. How do we shift the narrative to start talking about surpluses?
Well, you know, I think we would get surpluses almost immediately if we changed our policies. If we took away a lot of the burdensome regulations, if we dropped the tax rates, you would see money flooding back into this place if we just gave people the kinds of incentives that they used to have. And you look what happened in this country when we didn't have an oppressive government and when we did encourage entrepreneurship. We just skyrocketed. It's all pent up right now, ready to go. Look at all the money that's on Wall Street. That money would be invested immediately if people felt that there wasn't some nefarious government out there trying to figure out how to get their money.
Yeah, and by the way, the money wouldn't be in the Caymans, which you mentioned in your speech. And also if we would drill.
Yes.
Drilling, natural gas,
Well,
whether Saudi Arabia.
I mean, you look at North and South Dakota, Montana, you look at all that shale up there.
Oh, it's crazy.
I mean, we could just blow Saudi Arabia off the map economically.
Yeah, I love not being PC. Jeff Lord.
Doctor, I'm taking care of my 93-year-old mom, and so we have a few doctors in our life. And one of them left his practice not long ago for something I'm learning called a concierge practice. Another is very concerned about his practice and its continuance and his role in his own practice. Can you talk a little bit about how this Obamacare is affecting doctors in the medical community?
Yes. Well, first of all, recognize that you have to go back and look at this historically. When Medicare, Medicaid first came along, you know, doctors who took care of those patients knew that they weren't going to make any money, but they were okay with it because the insurance companies at that time did have to pay for the ones who did have insurance. And just about every doctor, Dr. Siegel can tell you, had a percentage of their practice that was indigent, and they didn't care. We've always taken care of those patients. But now, because the margins are so narrow, because the insurance companies can do what they want to do, they're not capable of doing that anymore. And, you know, I do think we need some insurance reform also, because when you stop and you think about it, one of the major pillars of our medical system are insurance companies that make money by denying people care. We need to deal with that situation because that's an inherent conflict of interest. And I'm sure if we sit down and put our heads to it, we can figure out a way that they can make an adequate profit and people can still be taken care of. But remember, when we go to the HSA situation, the insurance companies will have a very different role because they will just be doing bridge insurance, and we also will have a way of taking care of catastrophic insurance.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back more with our studio audience and Dr. Carson on the special edition of Hannity.